The no-till trial beds have helped me to understand how some plants grow or how they respond to the conditions that they are growing in. I noticed an interesting example of this when harvesting early potato plants from each of the 5 sections of the no-till trial. When we pulled back the thick mulch of the section covered with hay, which is often called the Ruth Stout method, the plants had sent out stolons, or the special horizontal stems at the end of which potatoes formed, right along the soil surface underneath the hay. This makes sense as it's a path of least resistance, which also made them quite a lot easier to harvest, and I noticed that some of the potatoes were quite far from the center of the plant compared to the other plants we harvested. In 2 of the other no-till methods, the potatoes were growing in soil or compost that was quite firm, and the dry conditions earlier this spring would have made the soil or compost even harder, which would have had an impact on the plant, especially if this was when the stolons were likely developing. With these plants, most of the potatoes formed closer to the center where the original seed potato had been planted, apparently because the stolons didn't grow as far through the firmer soil or compost. And with most of the developing potatoes all clustered together, a few of them were pushed up above the soil or compost to be exposed to the sun. This is something that I noticed last year with the main crop potatoes growing in different gardens. The plants that grew in the recently tilled soil had potatoes spread out over a much wider area than the same plants growing in the beds of the no-dig garden that had much firmer soil. This is a fairly simple idea, that the stolons could grow to different lengths depending on the soil conditions, and this can have consequences for how we might manage the crop and the quality of what we harvest. And it was really interesting to see such a strong visual example of this. While it is convenient to have most of the tubers developing closer together rather than having to dig them out over a wider area, we need to make sure to cover any potatoes that are pushed through the surface. And if we want well-shaped, large potatoes and to prevent disease from spreading from one potato to the next underground, it's probably better to have them spread out rather than all clustered together. So loosening soil before planting could be beneficial in some situations, or using a thick mulch of hay or straw where appropriate. This also helps to remind me that it's important to keep the soil moist earlier in the season so that the plants have a chance to properly develop, especially in the no-till beds that tend to get quite firm when they dry out.